Good afternoon, everybody. It's Friday and the 2nd of July and the 4th of July weekend. You're here at Lunch and Learn. Today we have a guest speaker, as we've advertised, Roger deBeus as the guest speaker. He's going to be talking about some of the research they did, looking at clinical trials of neurofeedback for attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. I'm not going to give Roger a long introduction. He may give you some more background on how we got into this project, but I've known Roger for several years. He's served as past president of ISNR more than once, and I was fortunate to get to know him and work with him during his year of presidency. I guess it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, whatever it was. Time flies. But at any rate, Roger's with us. And Roger, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you so much. I know you are busy, and we know we've been trying to get this thing scheduled for quite some time. So it's all yours now. We really appreciate you being here today.
And thank you, Rob, and thank you, Richard, for inviting me, and I appreciate the opportunity. Excuse me. So today I'm going to be discussing the outcomes of our double-blind clinical trial that we did with neurofeedback with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with children. And basically, I'm just limited to what we've been published so far on the study. All right, so disclosures, don't think we need to get into that. So part of our research team, Gene Arnold was the coordinating PI. I was a site PI, and we have the goal of the study was to integrate both neurofeedback professionals as well as clinical trial experts and ADHD experts, and hopefully come together and create a study that was approvable by both parties or all parties involved, because usually the way it was is the people that were getting funded didn't really know how to do neurofeedback, and people who knew how to do neurofeedback couldn't really get money. So we brought the two parties together, and we were actually successful in getting this trial funded for 5 years by NIMH. All right, so briefly I'm going to discuss how we address some flaws in previous neurofeedback trials, give an overview of our design and treatments, and then discuss the demographics, clinical profiles, and then post-treatment outcomes and 13-month follow-up outcomes. So typically, most of the previous studies have had small samples. There have been a couple of large ones. We're definitely one of the largest in the United States so far. And the other thing is that we created a sham that was of equal duration, intensity, and frequency based on pre-recorded EEG that overlaid the child's current that was being recorded. So every time there's a muscle artifact or movement artifact, it would superimpose on the trace. And so therefore you couldn't tell if it was live EEG or simulated mixed with live EEG. And then we also did blinding. All participants, parents, teachers, and trainers and investigators are blinded. We did not break the blind until sometime after our 2-year follow-up. And the other thing that NIMH is pushing for is research domain criteria to help identify different biomarkers associated with disorders, and in this case ADHD. And we chose to use the TBR ratio greater than or equal to 4.5 at either FZ or CZ was one of the requirements for getting into the study. And of course, we collected blinding information from children, parents, and trainers. We tracked and monitored medications, psychotherapy, educational interventions. We did not allow psychosocial treatment during the intervention, just during the treatment period, so between sessions 0 and 40. And then we had follow-ups. We had a 6, 13, and 25-month follow-ups. Okay, oops, did I just do that? Okay. Oh, and also we tracked adverse effects. And we standardized our training site at either CZ or FZ, inhibiting theta 4 to 8 hertz and rewarding beta 13 to 21 hertz for 38 sessions. And we systematically, the sessions were lengthened from 25 to 45 minutes. We shot for 3 times a week for 13 weeks. And then the other thing we did is we had Vince Monastra, one of the study consultants. We did what we call Fidelity monitoring. We video recorded every session. And what he did is he went back and randomly made sure that all the trainers were training the children consistently across both sites. So this is a 2-site trial at OSU and UNCA. And we had weekly calls with trainers. We had site visits. checking everything to make sure everything was all good at both sites. So basically, the study design consisted of a 2-site parallel group, double-blind, randomized comparison of active to sham neurofeedback. We had 142 boys and girls ages 7 through 10, rigorously diagnosed ADHD, both with rating scales as well as a clinical interview. Randomization occurred at a 3-to-2 ratio. We ended up with 84 active and 58 sham. The children who were on ADHD meds were randomized in blocks of 5, and all staff with participant contact did not know the condition the child was in. Inclusion criteria included, we conducted a structured clinical interview, which is the CHIPS, with the parent and the child. They had to get a T-score of higher than 65 and a Connors 3, DSM-5, ADHD, and attentive by both parent and teacher. If they didn't get one or the other, then that was an exclusion. Theta-beta-ratio had to be greater than or equal to 4.5. And whichever one was the highest also identified the training site for the study. Just apologize for the background. All right, IQ greater than or equal to 80. And another thing we looked into is vitamin D in the normal range, greater than or equal to 30 nanograms per milliliter. And if they were vitamin D deficient, they would supplement, come back, we'd read blood test them, and if they were in the normal range, we'd bring them back into the study. For exclusion, comorbid disorder requiring psychoactive meds, no alpha-2 agonists, so the Intunids, the Capvays, guanfacine could not be the primary ADHD medication. It had to be a stimulant because before each assessment point, we had the child wash out, if they were medicated, wash out for 5 days, so we can get ratings on them for each assessment point off of medication. So everybody was tested off of medication. And another exclusion was medical disorder requiring confounding meds, sleep apnea, restless legs, plans to move, no antipsychotics in the past 6 months, no Prozac in the previous 4 weeks, or other psychiatric meds in the previous 2 weeks, and they could not have more than 5 neurofeedback sessions. Okay, no psychosocial treatment, and for every child that entered, we did a full cap EEG recording, and the initial one was sent off to a neurologist, Meyer Proler, and to review for abnormalities. And if they had abnormalities, we sent them to a local neurologist. And if they passed with the local neurologist, they were let in. If not, they were treated for their seizures or whatever else they had going on. And I mentioned the vitamin D supplementation. Convergence insufficiency, very interesting phenomenon. Basically what that is adjusting your eyes from near to far. So like when a child looks at the board and then looks at their notes, their eyes have a hard time transitioning, which sort of puts them behind and interferes with the learning ability. And so if they had that, we would send them out to get treated for that. And then of course the 5-day washout if they were taking medications. So during the training, during the treatment, if they were on their medications, they were continued to allow to use them. So the way we did our sessions, we used training rewards, were measured with money points. And a point was earned by beating one of the 4 training parameters from the previous session. So one was the game point score, another one was the getting your beta up, another one was getting a theta down, and the other one was getting the TBR down. And so there's a total possible of 20 points per session. And in each session, every child earned an average of 9 to 14. And then of course we would bank the points from one session to the other, and after every 20 points, the child received a gift card for $15. Needless to say, that was a very good motivating factor to keep the kids going, to keep them showing up and things like that. And obviously this is where getting funded makes a big difference. So to get a sense of the difference between the 2 treatments, we have real and sham. And so all the kids got coaching, inhibiting movement, inhibiting muscle artifact, and they got money points, nutritional counseling, as well as sleep hygiene coaching. And so the only difference between the 2 groups is that the real neurofeedback group got contingent reward beta and contingent inhibit theta. So as we see, the sham is just with the inhibiting movement and muscle artifact, turned out to be quite an active component of our treatment. So the way our timeline worked, we had our screen and baseline assessment, which is part of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. that I discussed earlier. And then at the first session, we would set the initial reward thresholds. We did a 5-minute baseline and then average the numbers and use that as a threshold. And then by session 6, we would take the average of the first 5 sessions and reset the thresholds. And then we would start 6-minute, the task would start at 6 minutes per period, 5 periods. So that means the first 5 sessions were 25 minutes, the next 5 sessions were 30 minutes. And then by session 11, we went to 7 minutes, so that went to 35 minutes per task. And the thresholds were held consistent throughout the study. I know this is not necessarily how we always do things in practice, but that's how we did it in the study. Major assessment point was at session 20, where we did another brain map, did rating scales, teacher ratings, parent ratings, the IVA, etc. And then if they improved on their inattentive scale by 10%, they would move on. If they did not, then they would get offered a choice of getting medication consultation and or parent management training, parent behavioral management training. Session 21, we went up to 8 minutes per task, so that was a 40-minute session. And then by session 31, we started 45-minute sessions, going 9 minutes per task. And then in session 40, we had a post-treatment major assessment with 5-day washout for the medicated kids. And then the 6-month follow-up occurred from the baseline start point. And then we had the 13-month follow-up and the 25-month follow-ups. We had all our major assessments. All right, some of the things we used was a 26-channel EEG ERP, the IVA test, the time math tests for the child and for the parent and teacher. We had the Connors 3 functional assessment checklist, sluggish cognitive tempo. The parents also filled out a sleep habits questionnaire. And then we did the blinding questionnaire with the child or the parent. And then we also did clinical global impressions improvement severities, which is rated by clinicians at both sites. We did that about every 10 sessions. We would rate the child on how well they improved and their level of severity of their functioning. This is the consort chart, which basically identifies the flow of the participants into the study. We screened 329, 305 met the diagnostic criteria, excuse me, and of that, 235 met the TBR criteria. And then to the right of that, you'll see the 91 that were excluded and why they were excluded. Most of them were excluded for the teacher did not rate them severe enough and withdrew consent, and then follow up and then other reasons. So we started with neurofeedback with 85 and the control treatment of 59. And before the first 10 sessions, there was 1 withdrawn from each treatment. So we included 84 in the neurofeedback group and 58 in the control group. By mid-session, we had 17 exit per protocol, 5 stop treatment, and then in the control group, 11 exit per protocol. So that means they did not meet the cutoff criteria of improving by 10% on their inattentive symptoms. By the end of treatment, we had 82 in neurofeedback and 55 in the control group. And for the 13-month follow-up, we had 74 and 54. And I think that's about a 95% attrition rate or retention rate, sorry. So as far as that goes, that was pretty impressive to get that many kids to come back. So the mean age of the group is 8.4, 78% male, 76% white, non-Hispanic, 8% African-American, 4% Asian, 13% Hispanic. 49% of our kids were receiving special ed services. And as you can see with the household income, we had a relatively high rate of income in our group. You know, most 50 to 100, as well as over 100 per year. Primary parent education. We have high school up to 2 years of college, college grad, and advanced grad professional. So we have quite the educated group of parents participated in our study as well. As far as the ADHD diagnosis, 51 had an inattentive diagnosis and 91 had a combined diagnosis. And of that, 69% had comorbidity of oppositional defiant disorder or an internalizing disorder, like typically it was anxiety was the most occurring internalizing disorder. And the cutoff for the Connors was 1.5. And so with the parents, we had an average of 2.1. For the teacher, we had an average of 2. And that was our entrance criteria. And then the hyperactive impulsive, 1.9 by parent, 1.7 by teacher. And about 29% were taking stimulants, 31% the control group and 27% the neurofeedback group. They were pretty similar how that all worked out. Some interesting finding that we had in the beginning was a difference between the two sites, well, at least with vitamin D, but as we see with the TBR criteria, it was quite a robust marker, so to speak, lining up with the ADHD diagnosis. Overall, we had 70% of our kids who met that criteria. And then when we got to vitamin D, there was almost a significant difference between OSU and UNCA. Just with 400-mile difference, there was a huge vitamin D discrepancy between the groups. And then, of course, those got supplemented and most of them came back in. And the Fidelity was rated by trainers. So after each session, the trainer would rate how well they stuck to the session criteria. We had a list of a checklist of things that they should have done and things like that. And then, like I said, Vince, Monastro watched session videos. Adherence scored ranged from 0 to 100. And Vince came in at about 93%, while the trainers, of course, rated themselves almost at 99%. So that was a pretty close agreement there for the most part. And guesses about assignment. This is one of the things when you do blinding is to make sure were we really successful in blinding everybody? And as the numbers show, we were quite successful. So the parent got 34% correct, the child got 32% correct, the trainer 39%, and the average was 35%. So about a third of the folks got correct treatment assignment. And the control treatment was guessed more by the trainer and the parent, but not as much by the child, which was interesting. So they really couldn't tell if they were getting live or fake feedback. The adverse events, there's hardly any differences between the two groups. Behavioral, neurological, constitutional, eyes, ears, nose, throat, musculoskeletal, GI, respiratory, skin, and headaches. Headaches, irritability, oppositionality had the highest overall events. And sometimes too, what we found is we ended up changing our informed consent. Some of the kids, would get headaches after the sessions because in theory they were trying too hard or they're straining their eyes, and that ended up being a headache that would cause headaches with some of our kids. Okay, so our primary outcome is the composite rating of the Connors ADHD DSM-5 inattentive scale. And so the composite rating, as I said before, 1.5 is the cutoff point, and the composite rating started off at about 2 or just above it, and by session 20 we're almost right near 1.5 there. And we had 60% responders in the treatment group, which means the CGI improvement was either a 1 or a 2. And the parent ratings were a little bit better, and then the teacher ratings, so they all came down very nicely between the baseline and session 20, and they leveled out a little bit between session 20 and 40. And then the hyperactivity impulsive symptoms, same kind of pattern. We see they definitely improved significantly between baseline and session 20, and then level out a little bit, although the parents continued to get a little bit better towards session 40. Now what we want to do is compare to the MTA. The MTA was the largest clinical trial ever done with ADHD children. They had 4 treatment groups. I think there was about 6 sites involved or something like that. It is then, to this day, they're still doing follow-ups, like 20 and 30-year follow-ups with them. So that's considered the gold standard of ADHD treatment comparisons. So here's our group, the neurofeedback group. and then the MTA med management group. And so the med management group in the MTA got intensive medication management, which means they came on an average about every week or so in the beginning to titrate the medication to make sure the kids were on the optimal dose. And they were also rated on while they were medicated, obviously, versus our study, we did not have our kids medicated. And then the MTA behavioral group was intensive behavioral management, and they had a similar decline as well, sort of like a similar outcome to our study at the end. The behavior management group was also more intensive. I believe it was about 6 or 12 months. Don't quote me on that, but 6 to 12 months of intensive behavioral management. And it cost much more to implement the behavior management portion of the MTA than it did to implement our neurofeedback portion. So, and here's a surprise of our study. We compare the neurofeedback group versus control group, and we see that they have similar slopes. Basically, you know, the same thing with baseline to session 20, significant improvement, and then it levels out a little bit between session 20 and 40. And one thing we look at is pre and post effect sizes of inattention improvement. The neurofeedback group, the red is parent, the blue is teacher, and the green is the composite inattentive effect size. And with our neurofeedback group, we see about a 1 effect size, and anything above 0.8 is considered large. And then also we see a similar effect with the control group. And then the MTA behavior management, similar effects overall with the composite. And then of course the med management did quite a bit better at the end of the day. So one of the things we also looked at a little bit was looking at learners. And I'm sorry, I don't know, can't remember the exact numbers, but we did have significantly more learners in the neurofeedback group than we did in the control group. And this is an example of looking at a slope. And so each dot represents an average of about 5 sessions. And the green is the learning group where the theta starts high and trends downward, versus a non-learner, they're basically the theta activity stays relatively consistent over the course of the treatment. And so that's how we identified learners versus non-learners, by looking at the slopes. If it was a negative slope, they were considered a learner. And if it was a positive slope, they were considered a non-learner. And then one of the things we looked at is the theta reduction mediates teacher and attentive rating improvement. And this is done with the teachers. And then we can see the control treatment group didn't do as well as the neurofeedback group. And the learners were in green, while the non-learners were in blue here. And to the right, we see the neurofeedback group improve significantly with the teachers compared to the control group on the left, where they did not. So we had some difference with looking at the learners showing up differently with teacher raters versus parent raters. And part of that could be too, because the parents are the ones who brought the kids all the time. I mean, 3 times a week, you know, for 13 weeks, that's a lot of dedication, you know, to bring your kid into sessions. And usually we had parents filling out, you know, some kind of questionnaire, most sessions and things like that as well. Although the parents did get reimbursed for their time. An interesting study that indicates the importance of follow-ups. And so there was a study by Fidelity that did an RCT of theta-beta neurofeedback versus methylphenidate versus sports activity. And the initial result showed that sports was equal to neurofeedback, but less effective, those who were less effective than methylphenidate. But then after 6 months, they showed that physical activity was less effective than neurofeedback, which is similar to the effects of methylphenidate. So sometimes it's sort of like a sleeper effect. If you, one way to look at it is like, so even though you may not get the responses right away, there may be a delayed response, and that's one of the reasons why, well, why we kept going and doing our follow-ups. And now we look at the 13 months. The neuro group is in green and the control group is in red. And this is the composite parent and teacher. And then what we see by the we see the control group slightly edging up a little bit while the treatment group goes up a little bit and then comes back down by the 13-month follow-up. And the difference of the two groups was a 0.35, which is a small effect size, although that was not significant, but there was trending in that direction. Another thing we looked at was responders and remission, looking at the CGIs. And let's see here. So responder indicates, hold on. Okay, I'm going to skip this slide, sorry. Okay, so remission rates. One of the things that Swanson et al. Did with the MTA study is they identified someone who remitted with their diagnosis if they had an average rating of 1. So 1.5 is the clinical cutoff, and then the 1 meant that they no longer met criteria for ADHD. And so if we look at by the 13-month follow-up for the control group, excuse me, 18.5% of the kids no longer met criteria for ADHD, and then the neurofeedback group, 39.7 no longer met criteria. However, we did a sensitivity analysis because the two groups were 0.14 different in the beginning, and then it ends up being the control group is 24% remits. And so it started off significant. Before we did the sensitivity analysis, there was significant difference between remission versus, but once we did the sensitivity analysis, it was no longer significant because we put them on the same playing field. So in that direction. And this is a graph that Martijn Arns put together, looking at pre and post differences and pre and follow-up differences. So the pre and post is the gray, the pre and follow-up is the black. And the remission rates are at the top, comparing Strell's study, Gevensleben, and then Gelade, Steiner, and then the ICANN study, both with their TBR and control group, and then compared to the MTA trial to the right. And as I said before, we consider our study outcome similar to the behavior management outcome of the MTA trial, both in remission and effect sizes to some extent. Again, the large effect size here is 0.8. So we have some pretty decent effect sizes with, as we see with the Gelade study, they had the biggest jump from post to follow-up. And our study did the same versus our control group went down with follow-up. So that means there was some active components of the neurofeedback group that helped keep the symptom remission going. Then we also looked at changes in medication use. So we have baseline to end of treatment, baseline to 13-month, and end of treatment to 13-month. So the child either needed less medication, stayed the same, or needed more medication. And so by the end of treatment, they were about the same, about 5% each needed more treatment. And then by the time we got to 13-month follow-up, almost 40% of the controls and almost 18% of the neurofeedback group needed more medication. And that was significantly different. And then from end of treatment to 13-month follow-up, it was 36 and 16.5, and that too was significant. So we find that the kids who did not engage in the active treatment needed less medication. And that's probably a positive note. And then we try to figure out, did session rewards make a difference? The group's pretty much consistent across the board. The session money points, rewards per minute. And then we try to look at two, because one of the things we're trying to figure out is, how come the control group did so well, but the incorrect reward percent, they got 93% of the time got incorrect rewards. And incidental rewards, meaning they got the reward correct when their brain was in the right state, there was only 7% of that. So, but there's something still about the control group that was very active and that we think contributed to the whole, the findings that we had, because neurofeedback, as most of you know, is a package. And with that package, comes the coaching, comes the learning how to pay attention to a boring screen, and not to mention that you also have to sit still in order for the neurofeedback to work. So inherently, the kids learn how to sort of engage in this boring task, whether they were getting real feedback or not. Well, actually, they were getting real feedback on some level. If you think about it, they were getting feedback on their muscle tension and movement artifact. So that made the control a bit more active or semi-active. All right, so one of the things in summary, you know what, and I think this might end early, we selected those most likely to respond to TBR neurofeedback training as a research domain criteria. We randomized 142 children ages 7 to 10. We did an intent to treat analysis. We diagnosed the children both categorically with the CHIPS and dimensionally with the Conners, both with parents and teachers on the Conners. And they were randomly assigned to neurofeedback with the sham of same duration, frequency, coaching, and rewards for up to 38 treatment sessions. And as you saw, the blinding was successful by all the people that were rated it, the parents, children, and trainers. Now, one of the things we did is we addressed many flaws of previous trials. We used a combined parent and teacher rating. We had a high proportion of high TBRs, and we also had a high rate of vitamin D insufficiency. And I think we're in the process of publishing on that as well to determine how that interplays with ADHD. And as I mentioned before, vitamin D insufficiency was increased by a factor of 1.5 between North Carolina and Ohio. So in summary, the results apply only to theta-beta neurofeedback and also at FC and CZ. Both neurofeedback control had large pre and post effects comparable to the MTA behavioral treatment at endpoint. And it was not significantly different from control at endpoint, but diverges non-significantly at 1 year. We saw the trend where they're starting to get better with the neurofeedback group. And then this, of course, raises questions, both neurofeedback and evidence-based standard treatment, but we cannot conclude a specific effect of neurofeedback as much as we have an effect of the package per se, but not direct training or attempt of modulating theta and beta. As we see, there appears to be a delayed benefit, and once again, the non-specific effects apparently as good as a more expensive and intensive MTA behavioral treatment. 13-month symptom remission was twice as likely in neurofeedback versus controls. Medication twice likely to stop or reduce. And control group obviously needs further study. And then we have completed the 2-year follow-up, but we're in the process of writing up those results. And we keep scratching our heads. What made the control so effective? Did we just pick a sample with a good prognosis? Was it the EMG biofeedback artifact suppression that made a difference? Was it some of the reinforcement they got? The supportive coaching, that played a big role. The coaching we did was quite intensive, probably more so than most neurofeedback providers do. It was just literally, in the beginning, in between the sets, in between the periods, they did 5 tasks. So in between those, there was a coaching moment. We'd review the numbers. What can we do next time to get the numbers better, to get them to change? Also during the training, take a look. Oh, your EMG's going up. You need to try to relax. It was just ongoing. Quite a bit more, and I think that made a big difference. And of course, practice exposure to an uninteresting screen. Obviously, if you do that enough, you sort of get good at it. But the generalizability, I don't know. Quality time and relationship building, and one of the things we try to do too in our coaching was, always focus on the positive with the kids, always working towards a reward. And after the session, informing the parents how good Junior did, and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we brought attention to nutrition and sleep hygiene, about eating properly in the morning, and things like that. And I think in our first year alone, at my site at least, literally we had snacks. So all the time when the kids would be crashing by the time they came to our sites, so we gave a lot of kids snacks because they were crashing and burning, but at the same time it educated parents about how important nutrition was. And then of course the sci-fi props, putting the wires on your head, doing the computer games and things like that, because the computer tells no lies. It tells it like it is. And so, maybe there's a super placebo effect there. And then of course, is it necessary for the child to believe in it for it to work? The buy-in is a big issue, as many of you know, especially with kids. Sometimes it's a challenge to get them excited or engaged. And I think our study did a pretty good job of that for the most part. Oh, I guess I'm done. Dun, 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 dun.
All right. Well, Richard will start to unmute people, Roger, and that'll take him just a couple of minutes. We have to do it one by one. But really appreciate that's it's amazing. So what did you when you think about the whole study and all the findings thus far, and I know you've got other things you can't quite release yet. What do you think is the most significant thing about this, that we can actually start to talk to people about getting kids off of meds because you did a comparison that way? What's the team's thought about that?
I think we don't have a definitive answer per se globally, but in the end, the package of neurofeedback is very powerful. And I think, because it's neurofeedback is very integrative, it involves a bunch of different facets to it. And I think that part is what's strong. And maybe there is something about the theta and the beta that we just haven't captured yet looking at the data. I mean, I think we have like 4,700 sessions that we're going through and looking at all the the amplitudes of the theta and the beta and the muscle artifact and things like that. So we're still trying to figure out, what both groups did. Maybe the control group just reduced their EMG, and that in itself was good enough to get them to improve on their ADHD symptoms. And I'm sorry, I went off the beaten path. Did I even answer your question?
Yeah,
I think you did.
Yeah.
You did. I think one of the things, Roger, that is great about the study is you paid attention to so many of the details that many other studies didn't, and really gave us a clearer idea on what we should focus on in future studies, and in some ways generated more questions than answers, which is really what we need about this particular assumption that theta to beta ratio is somehow the best measure for assessment with EEG, or the best thing to train. I mean, I think it's also very instructive to everybody getting into the field how complex good research on this type of topic is. It really is a great,
It really
amazing
is.
study. An incredible group of people you had here doing this. Some of the best researchers I've seen out there involved. It's really wonderful.
We were quite fortunate to land with this group of people and to make this happen. But although in theory our paper says it was a failed trial, we still learned a lot, and we're still learning a lot. And I think in neurofeedback land, there's a lot of things we don't know. Like, for example, the interface. Which type of screen does a kid best respond to? With the reward rates, what's too much, what's enough, what's not enough. There's all these different things like that. So, and obviously we have that data, and teasing all that out is, I don't know if we can figure that out from our study, but there's all these different variables that go into it that we don't think about. But I think it's just the notion of the whole exercise process. It's like going to the gym. So long as you go to the gym and do something, you're going to get in shape. And so I think neurofeedback's the same way. So long as you engage in neurofeedback, something's going to happen because you're exercising your brain to do something different or exercising your mind to do something different.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something that I didn't quite hear in that I know Martin must have mentioned it because he asked the question in one of his studies, and he reviewed studies that were concerned about it too, and that was that a lot of the kids with elevated theta were in fact, in some of these studies, turned out to be elevated slowed alpha.
Yeah.
So Arns mentioned it in 2012, and Landsbergen in 2010 couldn't even find any difference in theta to beta ratios between the supposed experimental and control group to begin with. And he argued that it was because of slowed peak alpha frequency was confounding it. And I think Liu in 2012 said the same thing. So around that time in history, they were coming up with the same thing. And then by 2019, that had carried all the way up into, what's it, Deber et al. 2019, where he also was concerned about the slow alpha. And if you look at the Harvard research team on sleep, they're beginning to argue that a lot of these attentional issues are due to sleep problems, and that one of the key features of kids not sleeping is slowed alpha. So did you all take that into account, or any of that into account in your analysis?
Well, we did, not for the initial study entrance per se, but we did collect full brain maps at baseline session 20, session 40, and 13-month follow-ups. And Martijn Arns is actually looking at that data as we speak. And so
Right.
he is analyzing the effect of alpha peak frequency and how that sort of loads into the whole TBR kind of thing. So I know that's being looked at in our study, but I don't know what those outcomes are as of yet.
I think that's really important. You also see slower peak frequency in kids with physiological problems of certain kinds, if they're significant enough. And that would be a concern. But I noticed that you did do sleep coaching, and you said it was pretty rigorous stuff, sleep and nutritional coaching. Is that right?
Well, what we did was we asked them about their sleep every time they came in. So part of that was, okay, well, and then we mentioned to parents, sounds like Junior's not getting enough sleep, blah, 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 stuff like that. But typically we observed it more than anything, but studies have also shown, there was a study done, God knows how long ago, that just asked people to just weigh themselves once a week.
Right.
And just by doing that, they lost weight. They didn't tell them to go on a diet.
Sure.
They just lost weight because they were keeping track of it.
Yeah, and if you buy a thing to watch your steps, you'll take more steps too.
Right. So that was part of the, how we measure that exactly, I don't know. But,
so that's one potential confound in the mix. You also did no auto thresholding, so I would be concerned about ratio strain. I noticed you did adjust at certain periods, but did you look at the reinforcement rates and see if there was any ratio strain in the schedules that the kids
haven't quite got that far yet. It was pretty consistent across the board, but typically what would happen is they would do good one session point wise, and then the next session they would struggle a little bit. So it was, keeping those variables constant, I think was something that it was tough. I think we should have probably changed the thresholds more, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a big dispute about that, and I know Joel favors fixed thresholds, so it makes sense. In his early studies, that's what he preferred. But Judy threw some light on that. I won't get into that now. But as far as the comorbidities, you had pretty high comorbidities. It was 69%, I think, with 50% almost oppositional. That usually involves some depressive features, and you didn't look at QEEG to come up with the protocol. You just did across the board. So you may have seen maps with slowed alpha or elevated alpha and alpha asymmetries, and made a different call and got more efficacy if it was QEEG guided. So I think it's important.
Well, One of the things I can mention is that we did a comorbidity study looking at outcomes, and the kids who were in the neurofeedback group who also had oppositional did better than the kids in the control group with oppositional.
Wow, that's interesting.
And the kids with anxiety did worse with neurofeedback than the kids in the control group.
That's a fascinating finding right there.
It really is. It sort of mediates the whole thing on some level. So, or moderates. I'm sorry, I'm confused about those two.
Was there correlation, Roger, with the with the anxiety and sleep? The more anxiety, the worse their sleep. Was there anything you noticed there?
Oh, we didn't look at that one, but that's a good point to bring up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the other thing, let me get back to the high alpha, or low alpha peak frequency. So at the end of the day, whether it's low alpha peak frequency, from a frequency standpoint, it still loads in the theta. So it's not like our software says, oh, this is alpha, let me train something different, versus, oh, this is theta, let me train something different. From a frequency standpoint, the lowered alpha peak frequency still loads into theta when we train it.
Well, that is one good argument. There are counter ones, but that is a good point. Also,
can I quickly cut in, Richard? Very shortly. This is Martin. Dr. deBeus, is there a possibility that we could get a PDF of your slides?
I can.
Or the study, but I prefer the PDF of the slides.
I'll have to ask. I know that I can probably share the paper. Yeah, I can probably share the paper with you. It's being released today, actually.
Oh, great.
Fantastic.
That'll work.
Yeah. Now, did you say they reduced the stimulants over the sessions, or they controlled?
I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. So whatever medication they were on, they were supposed to keep the same dose throughout the study.
Okay, well, that's an issue too, because a lot of the clinicians report that a critical component of progress is the reduction of the stimulants. So that could be a big confound there.
Well, we did have a couple reduced, but I don't think there was that many that reduced. But it was more or less after treatment ended, then medication changes were made. But some did reduce during the study.
This was a severe group. I mean, you really wanted somebody. This crowd had to be really 2 standard deviations or more out, in terms of theta-beta ratio to really qualify. So it was a tough group you were training for sure to begin with.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Veronica.
Great presentation. I'm just curious, just a little detail. Was there a specific time that you chose to train these kids, and were you consistent throughout?
That's a good question. Usually it was done, we did it throughout the school year because we wanted teacher ratings. So we started recruitment in September and ended by February so they could finish the treatment before school ended. Typically the schedule was made as consistent as possible, but usually it was up to the preferences of the parent/child. So sometimes, typically they would come in after school. That's when most of our sessions were. We did some Saturday sessions, which obviously occurred probably in the morning, early afternoon. And then during the breaks, we had probably some time changes as well. So they were a little bit of everything.
I just know that usually with the kids, I mean, obviously, as you know, great presentation, by the way, they're usually more tired towards the latter part of the day and after school. So do you think that may have had an impact on the study?
I think on some level it did, and you're absolutely right. And we even had a kid came in for a follow-up visit after doing EEGs all day, end of grade testing, and the kid was just like falling asleep sitting in the chair. And we said, why don't you go home and come back in a couple of days so we can get a better reading on you. So that happened a couple times. But yes, obviously after a long day of school, the kids are, it's pretty challenging to sit there, especially when we got to the 45-minute session. That's a long time to pay attention after sitting in school all day. So yeah, I guess we can go look at that data and figure out the time of day and to see if that had an impact on their theta-beta ratios and things like that. And that's obviously a variable to look at. Now we have the data.
Okay. I have a question regarding the nutritional component and subcategories.
The vitamin D folks that were, well, the people that were very low on vitamin D, were they, were you able to segment to say, okay, they're the Hispanics, the dark skinned population, because that's how you pretty much produce it. They have a little bit more resistance. And the socioeconomical part of it is most of them were 50K and up, around 73%. So the lower income, how did they respond, as well with the people that had more pigmented skin to the study?
Excellent questions. Like I said, I think somebody's working on a vitamin D paper. I'm not sure the results of that. I'll check into that. The comments you just made, I think, are very valuable. So I will pass that information on, and we'll see if we can look into that. But I personally don't know those numbers per se. I can't rattle them off for you.
Okay, thank you.
Roger, you presented some of this information, and Martine was there at the last ISNR to a pretty good crowd of people. Your presentations seemed to strike quite a nerve. What was your take on that?
It really does. And when we had our reveal meeting at Ohio State, and when we were showed the results, everybody's mouths just dropped. And we just sat there in silence going, what the HE double toothpicks just happened? And we were all just as shocked about it. And
Yeah.
because, but so that's why, so that's why we, there's something about the neurofeedback package, and we just haven't, and I think somebody's done some studies of that, looking at, when you pay attention to different things improve, and after a while you get a cumulative or an additive effect of people getting better just by looking at different things like sleep and exercise and diet and things like that. So people will naturally get better, but clinically, sleep, I think, is the biggest thing. If you improve someone's sleep, you're going to get much better responses or results than probably anything in general.
I would agree.
Yeah, sleep is a big issue.
Preaching to the choir here at the New Mind Group. That's, I mean, all our assessments are built around all of that.
I know that we're close to the top. We're actually at the top of the hour. Quick question for you. Did you see the study that just came out of Geneva, Switzerland, where the neurologists are now discovering that neurofeedback can help ADHD?
No, I didn't see that. You have to send that to me.
I'll send that to you. It's just a science thing, but it'll give you the link to the actual.
Oh, yeah, send it to post it, because, of course, now neurofeedback's been discovered.
Yeah, after 50 years, it's been discovered.
Yeah, they're a little slow.
Yeah. Okay, just fabulous, Roger. Thanks so much for taking the time and sharing this with us and giving us all the stuff to think about. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, Roger, if you can share the paper, email it to me and I'll post it on our listserv. I'll send you that article out of Geneva.
Okay.
And we really do appreciate, like Richard said, we appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, and extend our appreciation to your whole team. So,
yeah,
really. At least over in our camp, we love it. It's great.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And neurofeedback does work. All of us wouldn't be doing this otherwise.
That's right.
That's right. Let's have them know more about how.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, have a great 4th of July, Roger. Everybody out there, thanks for attending. Have a great 4th of July weekend. Keep it safe. We are not meeting Monday because that's the official federal holiday, and the New Mind team told Richard they needed an extra day just to recover. So we'll see you all next Wednesday. Y'all take care.
Have a good holiday.
Bye-bye.